Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Vanessa Spina, aka Ketogenic Girl, is the host of KetogenicGirl.com, a popular website loaded with ketogenic resources. She also has her own podcast, Fast Keto, where she interviews doctors, researchers, and keto success stories. It sounds familiar. Vanessa has helped hundreds of people, maybe thousands, lose weight and regain their health through her 28-day challenges and keto meal plans. She's also the author of Keto Essentials and has recently gone back to school at the University of Toronto to study biochemistry. Vanessa makes tons of helpful evidence-based content that she shares for free across her YouTube, Instagram, and podcasts, and shares rational perspectives about diets, mindset, body composition, and tons of practical tips as well. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Scott. Wow, that was such a nice introduction. I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thrilled to have you on, and would love to just start with, what inspires you and gets you up in the morning. You're doing so much across the podcast, your website, your meal plans, helping clients. I know you have the Facebook community groups. What really keeps you inspired and motivated to do this great work?
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, every day, what inspires me is this vision that I have. I have a vision of a world that is completely free of modern chronic non-infectious disease. And I believe that we can prevent a lot of disease through eating whole, real, single ingredient foods. And I've had a lot of family members and family friends who have left us too early. And I know that a lot of us have suffered that pain of having family members around us having non-infectious disease. And I just have this vision of creating this world, all of us together, where people are not suffering, they're not losing their dignity, health is democratized, and everyone has access to glowing, vibrant health. Because I've seen the difference it's made in my life, going from really struggling and not enjoying the experience of being in this body to loving every minute of it and feeling so much joy in my body and so much love for myself and for others. And I just want as many people as possible to be able to experience that too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Seeing others sick and experiencing the benefits of these types of diets and lifestyle changes for themselves, and just wanting other people to be able to feel that too. And is that kind of why you originally started Ketogenic Girl? And can you talk about how the brand and the podcast has kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been about 5 years. I used to work in finance. I had my stockbroker's license and I loved finance. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't really something that, like you said, inspired me every day. I mean, I enjoyed finance. I enjoyed working in the stock market, but it wasn't something that had my heart in it, my passion in it. And this was just something that I did as a hobby. I always loved reading anything about self-improvement, about personal growth, and about health and fitness. And it was just a passion of mine. And it was so cool that when I just started posting and sharing about this stuff, that there was just a really good response, and it just grew and grew and grew. And, like I had said, I experienced so many amazing results, but I also struggled a lot and made a lot of mistakes. And so when I figured those mistakes out, I had people coming to me who were asking me for help and wanting me to create meal plans for them and do macros. And I was like, well, this is maybe some way that I could do this full time. And I created Ketogenic Girl. Actually, the very first order that I had for a meal plan program, I hadn't created the program yet. And so I spent all of Christmas. My husband was all alone. He was walking around Prague downtown by himself at the Christmas markets and stuff because I was at home creating meal plans and this program because I was having so much demand for it. And I ended up having my first ever order on Christmas Day for my program. And that was a few years ago now. And it's just been amazing just to see all this growth, but also to have created a program that I can add my support and coaching to, because there's just so many questions that people have, and there's so much support that people have when they're learning and doing this, that you can't just get a meal plan and then go off on yourself. Some people can do that, but most people really need someone to hold their hand and help them who's made those mistakes before and can just save people time and save them a lot of struggle of making mistakes and not getting the results that they want. So it's been so cool to create that and share that, but I'm also really passionate about the science that supports and backs all of this. And I think that this is what's going to make the difference between low carb fads and trends that came before it, is that we have the science and we have the knowledge and understanding how our body is best supported to be in homeostasis, to be in its optimal function when we provide it with the essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and essential vitamins that the body needs. And keto does this. It flips the standard American diet, the standard government food pyramid, upside down, which is all based on the only macronutrient that's non-essential, carbohydrates, and it places and prioritizes our essential macronutrients so that most people can get their essential nutrient needs met much more easily.
Yeah, it's super interesting to me how a lot of things like low carb have existed in the past, but we haven't really known the science behind it, or at least there hasn't been as much published research. And now more and more the biochemistry is coming out to support it. Like, I feel like Atkins was a great example of a diet that a lot of people lost a lot of weight on. You know, you talk to people who were around in kind of the heyday of Atkins, and they were like, yeah, everyone knew that Atkins made you lose a ton of weight. But no one really knew why, and people were concerned about cholesterol and whether it was healthy for your heart long term. But now, thanks to the great work of researchers like Dr. Ben Bickman and Dom D'Agostino and many, many others, and people like yourself who are synthesizing it and making it publicly available, it's becoming more and more commonly accepted that a ketogenic diet is healthy, not just great for fat loss. And I get so excited about this, I just have to say, because I think that when people understand the science, I love taking the science and extrapolating and just making it as simple as possible, because people have busy lives and they don't have time to go study biochemistry in a textbook and learn all of these complicated, biochemical pathways and things. If we can just make the science really simple for people to understand, this is what cholesterol actually is, you can then become empowered and more confident and a better advocate for yourself and your health. So I get really excited about people just understanding the science behind all this. Yeah, that's awesome. And are most people still coming to you, or the people you help most often with a ketogenic diet, are they coming for fat loss?
I think that it tends to be the most common thing stated, but I would say that every single person who comes to me, like more than 80%, says weight loss, but also this. And there's always some kind of, physical issue that they haven't been able to resolve with, drugs or going to see their physician, something that physicians haven't been able to figure out for them, or, there's just some kind of lingering health issue that they and the medical system, which is very much centered on treating symptoms, just hasn't been able to find the root cause of. And so now they're looking at nutrition. They're open to finding out, could this keto thing maybe be the answer for me? And so I would say that, yes, most people come for fat loss and weight loss because that's the majority of my client base, but they always have something else. You know, it's like fat loss. Oh, and I also have this really annoying skin issue, and fat loss. And I also have, you know, high blood pressure and this and that. So that tends to be the pattern that I see.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I get messages from people all the time who said, you know, it seems to be either I'm not losing weight, help me fix this, or, you know, I started a keto diet, I started a carnivore diet to resolve X or Y. So it seems like it is branching out a lot more besides just the losing 10 pounds, losing 20 pounds. There are a lot of people with underlying health issues who are accepting that these diets are helping them with that. And Vanessa, one thing that I love when you talk about is some of these things around mindset, you know, whether it's, feeling full and feeling fulfilled, feeling, you know, socially accepted, and having a positive relationship with food with regards to a ketogenic or carnivore diet, both how switching to that type of diet can help you, and how, you know, people who are already practicing a keto or carnivore diet can feel restrictive, and how they can overcome that and feel more free and feel more choice and positivity around their food choices. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think about that, how you help people overcome it, or how you've done so for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a couple things in there, you know, that we can talk about. The first, I think, is mindset is, you know, not talking a lot about what you're doing can be helpful, because a lot of times people will complain about like their coworkers saying that they're doing something unhealthy or dangerous. I'm like, well, just don't talk about it, because if you talk about it, you're going to draw attention to yourself. And especially if you try to talk about it and try to convince other people to do it, I think the best thing is just focus on yourself, you know, keep your head down, just do your thing. And then when people see how incredible your health is and how joyful you are, how loving you are, how full of energy you are, how great you're looking, you know, your skin, all these things, they're going to say, you know, are you doing anything different? And that's when you can talk about it and you can rant and rave about it. But I think that it's a mistake to get so excited about it that you just talk about it to all these people and you challenge them and what they're doing and all of this, and that can make it uncomfortable socially to do this stuff. Whereas if you don't talk about it, people don't really notice. Like, they don't notice that you're not eating all the carb sides at maybe your holiday meal or something. They don't notice that you're not doing a lot of the things unless you really talk about it and you really make it visible. You know, and I think that's just a natural human tendency to talk about things when we're doing it. And that's why it's so important to have community and support of other people who are doing this stuff that you can share and talk about it with them. You know, and I just think that's just one kind of important thing. If people, you know, can get into struggling socially with whatever they're doing being so different and not accepted. I think it's easier now than it was even a few years ago. It was harder to do this stuff. It's becoming rapidly much more normalized, you know, because the trend has been growing so much. I think the other thing that you mentioned there was about freedom and restriction. And I like to focus more on the positive of, you know, it's not so much about what you're taking away. For example, with, you know, carnivore, a lot of people focus a lot on the fact that you're zero carb and you're not eating all these other plant foods. But for me, it's like, but look at all the amazing foods that you are getting to eat. And so, you know, instead of looking at intermittent fasting, look at it at intermittent eating. There's all these different ways that you can look at things. But for me, I personally have come from a food addiction background. And I'm also someone who is an abstainer, and there's abstainers and moderators. So, and a moderator, if you tell them that they can never have a certain food ever again, it'll drive them nuts. They just don't want to think that way. They want to be able to moderate, and they tend to be able to moderate certain things better. Then there's abstainers, which is my type of personality. So it's much easier for me to abstain completely from certain things, especially carbs and processed foods and sugar and sweeteners and all these things. It's way easier. And I think a lot of people who are carnivore have found this too, to just abstain from carbs completely than to just have a little bit. It's kind of like, you know, a cocaine user who's just doing like a little, instead of doing a big, you know, dose of cocaine, they're just having like a tiny little bit all day long, and, you know, or every once in a while. It's just going to be a lot harder. And so I have found that as an abstainer, coming from food addiction, I have found so much freedom in just letting go of carbs completely, and that I no longer have any fixation around food whatsoever. I look at it as something that is nourishing and fueling me, as opposed to something that is there to soothe me or make me feel better or give me some pleasure. And the ironic part is I've never enjoyed eating more or enjoyed my meals more than I do now, but it is a shift in mindset.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people will probably hear this and be able to relate, but also a lot of others will hear this and say, oh man, that's a pipe dream for me. I'm so far away from that. And it's definitely something that evolves over time. You know, it's not a 30-day ketogenic protocol that'll completely change your mind around food. I think some of these health benefits can show up a lot sooner than, and even weight loss benefits, than actually shifting your mindset around cravings and food addiction and your relationship with food and how you behave socially around food. Those can be things that have developed over years and take a long time to correct. But I love the idea you present of kind of flying under the radar and not boasting about your diet and kind of sticking your flag out and trying to fight everyone who's eating differently than you. It's a really good way to approach it. And let's talk a little bit about body composition, because I think you have some amazing thoughts here. People who are trying to lose weight, people who are trying to not only lose weight, but lose fat and gain muscle, which I know you talk about is more important than the number on the scale. What advice do you give people, you know, when they're starting out, or how does that advice kind of evolve over time with someone with the goal of fat loss?
I love this question, and I love getting to talk about this as much as possible, because I think that way too many people rely on the scale to measure their progress. And the scale does not give us the full picture, and it especially doesn't tell us anything about our body composition. Now, if you look at some of my before and after photos, people will be alarmed at the fact that I was 38% body fat. And the day that I found out that I was so embarrassed and I was so shocked, and I couldn't believe that I could be that high in body fat percentage. Now, for women, over about 34 or 35% is obese. And so someone can actually be obese physiologically and not look it from the outside. And there are people that I know who were much larger than me physically, and yet they had a much lower, much healthier body fat percentage. And this can happen very easily to someone who has been dieting from the age of 12, which I was doing, because when you do a diet on a standard American or high carb diet, oftentimes we lose water, we lose a bit of, we lose some glycogen maybe, we lose some fat, and we lose some muscle. But everyone thinks we're just burning fat. A lot of times you're just losing all of that. And then when you go off that temporary diet and you gain weight back, which many dieters do, and which I did, you just gain fat back. And so over time, that can really make the body very under-muscled. I was also vegetarian for 17 years, and so I became really protein deficient in that time, and I had no idea that my body fat percentage was so high and that I was so under-muscled. And this means that my body didn't have a lot of muscle, that I didn't have a lot of strength, and also didn't have a lot of bone density or strong bones. And so for me, the focus really should be on body composition. And you can go and get a DEXA body scan. That's DEXA body scan. If you Google DEXA body scan near me, a lot of shopping malls also have these things called bod pods. And these are the most reliable, effective accurate ways to actually figure out what your body composition is. And it will tell you what your body fat percentage is and what your lean mass is. And that's such a better way to actually measure your progress. And you can get these done once a year or a couple times a year. And it also goes along with measuring inches and how your clothing fits. And to me, this is such a better way of actually measuring, are you getting healthier, as opposed to the scale, which your scale number can fluctuate about 10 pounds just based on water retention. So water is extremely heavy. A cubic foot of water weighs 62 pounds. And so people will get upset when they see that they're in some kind of perceived stall because the scale hasn't changed, or it sometimes does go up, but that doesn't mean that the body is putting on fat. So sometimes, especially when you're doing a keto diet that is mostly fat and protein, or protein and fat, your body composition is changing. You're getting stronger bones. Bones are mineralized protein. You're getting and building stronger muscles, especially if you're doing weight resistance exercise. And you're most likely burning fat because you are in a fat burning mode from depleting your carbohydrate intake. And so getting wrapped up in scale numbers, I think, is just a place that can be really frustrating for people when the ultimate goal is really to lower body fat percentage, preserve or build muscle and bone. And so that's such a better way to actually be able to track your progress and see that you're actually getting better, getting healthier. It's also great to, check your blood work as well and get blood panels done and stay, aware of how you're doing on that level. And those are things that I think are better measures than just looking at the scale, which really doesn't give us a whole lot of information.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that holistic view to thinking about overall health and body composition on a longer term basis than, let's just try to get another pound off the scale today, another pound off next week, etc. It's a much more holistic view, still saying I want to improve my body composition. I have this goal of looking better, feeling better, being healthier, but doing it in a smart way, where you're paying attention to retaining lean mass. Because as you said, in both your before and after pictures, you look really healthy. And I think no one would look at those pictures and say, oh, this person needs to lose weight. But that change in body fat percentage and the lean mass you've gained has no doubt made you a much healthier person. And I think a lot of people would be better served by focusing on that rather than just the number on the scale or a lot of kind of short-term transient goals.
Yeah, and can I just add, Scott, I think it's so important also, and I post these before and after photos, even though sometimes I get some negative feedback with people going, oh, well, you look great in your before photo, or, and people get upset by them. I'm like, I'm trying to share that someone can be physiologically obese and very under-muscled, and that is going to set a person up for having metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance or a lot of non-infectious chronic disease later in life. And we see this a lot with athletes and also people who are in our community who they always looked great and they always looked fit, and yet suddenly they found out they're pre-diabetic or they're diabetic, and they have no idea why that happened or how that happened. And so looks and external appearance really don't tell the full story. And I think it would be great for every person to know exactly what their body fat to lean mass and bone actually is. And it's not just about the way you look. You can look great, you can look slim on the outside, but you need to know what your internal health really is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And let's talk a little bit, Vanessa, because I know you've done a lot of research on this recently, talked about it on your podcast with some great guests, and just dove into, the fundamental research yourself, which is awesome, through your studies. How do you think about macronutrients just at the highest level? We can talk about micronutrients later as well, but for both weight loss and feeling optimal, what are your current views on protein versus fat and how someone can play with those, to lose fat improve their lean mass and also feel the best they can, not feel like they're starving themselves or low energy.
I love this. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a lot of people overly restrict protein. And so I definitely think that it's really important to experiment with higher levels of protein and lower levels and test things and tinker and see where you feel best and where you get the best results. But sometimes I do see in the keto space that protein can be overly restricted. And I think that at the beginning, when you're first starting out, if you're brand new to this and you just want to get into ketosis and experience what that's like, I often do set recommendations of fat to be quite high, especially because a lot of people are deprived of healthy fats because we were in such a fat, phobia for so long. So my program actually sets the fat macros. My most successful weight loss program, the fat macros are at about 80%. And that's quite high. And that's because we need healthy fats in order to make all of our sex hormones, in order to make the precursors for our cholesterol and all of our steroid hormones. And it also helps the body to make fat burning enzymes, which are lipases. And it's important to really provide the body with healthy fats. It needs healthy fats in order to burn fat, in order to make all these hormones that are going to help signal and communicate better in our body, all these things such as our satiety and all of this. The most satiating macronutrient, in my opinion, is protein, and that is because it provides the essential amino acids that we need. Now, fat also does this. Fat provides the 2 essential fatty acids that we need, and it also provides the fat-soluble vitamins that we need, which are essential vitamins A, D, E, and K, and we need to get these from external sources of fat. And so fat can be very satiating in that sense, also because it's very energy dense, but a lot of people focus on the fact that fat is energy dense, that it has 9 calories per gram, but I think that its satiety factor comes from the fact that it has our essential fatty acids and essential fat-soluble vitamins that we need. Protein is extremely satiating, and I think even more so than fat, because it not only provides the 9 essential amino acids that we need, but it also provides a lot of the water-soluble vitamins that we need. So both protein and fat are very satiating as compared to carbohydrate, which is not very satiating. It's the only macronutrient that's not essential. It does not have any essential macro components to it in terms of having an essential carbohydrate, because carbohydrates are just polymer chains of glucose molecules that are chained together, and we have our own factory in our liver for making glucose whenever we want via the process of gluconeogenesis. So that is why fat is really important to emphasize. Protein is also really important to emphasize because it's going to generate so much satiety, and it's going to provide a lot of those essential micronutrients, and then it providing the 2 essential macronutrients that we need. And so it can help with people feeling good, feeling food freedom, feeling like they've gotten the nutrients that they need, and so they can get on with doing other things and not being focused on food because they're starved of nutrients, which can very easily happen when a diet is deprived of fat and is low in protein. So I see a tremendous amount of success on my program, which has a very high fat ratio. And over time, when people have been doing that for a while, I tend to shift them over to my higher protein plans because people will be getting more to weight maintenance and they'll be getting more to wanting to build more muscle. And I do think that over time, having a higher protein intake can really be beneficial for that, especially if you're doing weight-bearing exercise and you are exercising and wanting to build a lot of muscle and you're doing exercise that's stimulating that.
Yeah, super well said, and I agree with all those points. And I like how you take a balanced approach, saying both not restricting protein is super important for all essential organ, muscle, function and satiety, but not restricting fat is also important. You know, if you go low in fat, your hormones tank, you feel worse mentally, physically. totally agree that both of those are critical. And one thing I've kind of struggled with myself, I feel best around, 1 gram of fat per 1 gram of protein, maybe a little bit higher in protein than fat. But a lot of folks have been coming out, it's a small pocket, but a shouting minority have kind of said, oh, dialing up the protein and restricting the fat didn't work well for me. And people like Dr. Paul Saladino are expressing concerns over having, on a carnivorous diet, for instance, chronically over 200 or 300 grams of protein a day and keeping the fat kind of lower. And one of the reasons some of the things they talk about are, one, a lot of the protein leverage hypothesis, sort of this idea that the more protein you eat, the less food you eat. And as you eat less protein, you need to eat more food to make up for it, to reach a protein goal. A lot of that research is done both in the context of higher carbohydrate diets and also going from something like 10 to 15% protein to, say, maybe 20 or 30% protein, where, of course, making that change, I think most people would agree, once you're going from under protein to adequate or slightly over adequate protein, you're going to feel more satiated. But the problem is with extrapolating up to, a carnivorous diet or a very low carb ketogenic diet, when your carb sources are so low, if you're eating 20 or 30% protein, you're probably great. And then bring that up to 40 or 50% of your calories from protein, is kind of a totally different ballgame, because all of a sudden to do that, you're sort of crowding out the fat that would be providing energy. And a lot of people say, oh, well, you just burn your own body fat stores. But it seems like what may happen, and you understand the biochemistry way better than I, is once you're bringing up that protein to those much higher levels, kind of doing a quasi protein sparing modified fast, all of a sudden your body needs to, it's not demand driven, it's not a supply driven process, but because there's less fat in your diet, your body is forced to go through gluconeogenesis more, and it's producing more glucose from that protein because you don't have as much fat in your diet. And all of a sudden that's spiking your blood glucose more. You have less CCK release because you don't have as much fat. This insulin to glucagon ratio, although both of those go up when you have a protein bolus on a ketogenic diet, insulin does go up a little bit more than glucagon. So if you repeat that kind of insulin and glucagon spike every day, day after day after day, perhaps insulin could go up more than glucagon does, and that could produce a form of insulin resistance. Now, this is all like much less than having high carbs every day, so maybe it doesn't matter. But curious how you think about that. I know it's kind of an advanced biochemistry type question, and we don't have all the research to say, especially in the context of carnivorous or keto diets. But how do you feel about that idea of, just dialing up the protein and ratcheting down the fat, not necessarily being a great answer for fat loss on a keto diet?
Such a great question. And, I'd love to dig into it with you more. So basically protein and fat combined, they usually have an equal insulin to glucagon response. But you're right that if protein is eaten in very, very, very large amounts, it can throw off that ratio. I personally don't believe that consuming 200 to 300 grams of protein is necessarily the best thing, unless you are an extreme bodybuilder and you are doing a lot of exercise every day. And I mean a lot. You're spending several hours in the gym. I don't think that having blood glucose that is, say, over 100 every morning, I don't think that it's necessarily great for metabolic health, even if it's very stable. The fact that it's stable is better than it going up and down, because it really is the highs and lows that really puts oxidative stress on the mitochondria in our cells. But at the same time, being over 110 fasted glucose is pre-diabetic. So I do think that it can be overdone, and that's why I tend to prefer that people find an amount of protein for themselves that keeps them in a morning fasted blood glucose that is still sort of in the 90s or 80s. And 90s is I think still fine. I think if you're going over 100 or over 110, that it may be an indicator that there's too much being consumed. And it's really hard to overeat protein because it is biological functional material. It goes to rebuild all of our muscle. It goes to make all of our hormones. It goes to make all of our enzymes. It does so many processes in the body. We need proteins for everything. But at the same time, I do think there is a point where eating too much protein, it can offset some of the benefits of restricting carbohydrates because it can then put the body in a state where it just has, I wouldn't say too much energy because protein is not considered energy by the body, but it can offset that balance, like you were saying. And so I still recommend testing blood glucose at home and not relying so much on ketones, but ketones can also be beneficial for people to know because I just know that for myself, everyone has kind of a range where they feel their best. And I talk a lot about higher protein. I mean higher protein from overly restricted protein. I don't mean higher protein from, as in high protein. Yeah. And that's a big distinction. Don't overly restrict your protein, but at the same time, if you're just consuming endless amounts, you will probably gain weight. If you're eating, just treating carnivore, for example, as a free-for-all, I think in that situation, if someone is really eating tons and tons and tons of food every day on carnivore, that they may be missing something in terms of listening and tuning into the hunger and satiety. I eat my meals, I'm carnivore right now. I've been doing carnivore for about the past year, except for pretty much dark chocolate. And I only eat when I am hungry. Whereas in the past I would maybe eat when I'm bored or when I'm peckish or because the time said it was mealtime. I eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full. And that doesn't lead to massive amounts of protein and fat that I'm consuming. It's a very reasonable intake. And my blood glucose is still in the 80s and 90s in the morning. And I still generate ketones. I'm still in ketogenesis. So I think that is something important that you bring up. And, it's up to each person to find out where they feel best. Maybe they feel best at over 100 blood glucose every day. But if they're not seeing results that they want to, it might be something to look into, testing your blood glucose and seeing where it's at fasted in the morning, because having high blood glucose is not just an indicator of, prediabetes or those kinds of things. It can also be an indicator of too much stress, having really elevated cortisol, or just something else being off. So I still like to approach all of this from a standpoint of ketogenesis and a standpoint of really having very healthy blood glucose that is stable, but also blood glucose that is in a very healthy range.
Yeah, I really like the context you put around that, Vanessa. And I think, high protein is just such a general term, and we always need to kind of qualify it with, what is your lean body mass? What is your activity level? How old are you? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? What types of foods are you eating? And the thing I'm more concerned about, and I think this is probably a smaller problem than a lot of the people you're dealing with who are under consuming protein, is a lot of carnivores eating 2 to 3 pounds, maybe even 4 pounds of meat a day. They're easily getting 200, 300, 400 grams of protein. And is that going to be a problem long term for them? Is that going to affect their blood glucose long term? And I think the solution you offer of checking your morning fasting glucose, checking your postprandial glucose is a really good one. And something that's not too hard for people to do with some of the glucose meters that are available today, to easily do that. Or just getting a blood test.
Yeah, I just want to point out one quick thing is that some people fear eating more protein because they do see the blood glucose number go up, and it's normal for it to go up. If you say go carnivore, it's normal for it to go up by about 5 to 10 points, but that's just because glucagon is being released and it's releasing a little bit of glucose from the liver because you don't have any carbohydrate coming in. It's there to prevent you from having abnormally low blood glucose and having a hypoglycemic event. And that's why that happens. I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because I don't want people to get freaked out if they do see the blood glucose go a little bit higher. It's completely normal, and it's a fail-safe mechanism that the body has. So that's just one thing is not worrying about it being a little bit higher when they're eating more protein. Absolutely.
That's a great point. And you talked about carnivore. You're mostly carnivore today, Vanessa. Can you talk about what kind of a day of eating looks like for you and you know, what your meal structure looks like, what some of your favorite foods are?
I would love to. So I'm really big on nose to tail. I think it's super important to make sure that you're getting all your micronutrient needs met. And it's so easy to do even when you are carnivore, you're zero carb. It's very, very easy to do. So I usually have 2 meals a day. I have my first meal around midday because I don't tend to get hungry until around midday or even early afternoon sometimes. But it usually is around noon or 1 o'clock. And I like to have eggs. I have my chicken liver pate, which I post a lot about because it's so easy to make. It only takes 10 minutes. And I make the chicken liver pate even just with chicken livers or with turkey livers. And I also like to add in turkey hearts, other organ meats, and I fry that up in ghee or in some other fats that I have, tallow or other things from cooking things in my slow cooker that I save. And fry that up. I add some water to it or some bone broth, and I just blend it up in my food processor and put it in the fridge. And it's so delicious. I call it my savory ice cream. It tastes so incredible, and I like to have that with my first meal. I also make a salad out of wild salmon and wild sardines in order to make sure I get a lot of healthy omega-3 fatty acids in there. And there's just a ton of micronutrients in sardines. There's a lot more omega-3 in sardines and wild sardines than there are even in salmon, but the two both have a lot of the essential fatty acids that we need. And I'll also just play around with other things that I'll have. I usually like to have sometimes minute steaks of that in the morning, which take about less than a minute to cook, and just keeping things really, really simple. And for dinner, I usually like to do either ground beef burgers or I'll do steak. And a lot of times I will get really cheap cuts of meat and put them in the slow cooker for about 8 hours. I haven't really gotten into the Instant Pot thing yet, but I'm a little scared of the one that we have. I gotta get used to it, but I love the slow cooker. There's something just about like having it there, and I can go over and like check on it and see how it's doing. And then I'll make, like beef short ribs or something and take the bones, and then I'll make bone broth from that. And you can do that in an Instant Pot too, but I usually like to have that every day. And I would say my intake of meat probably doesn't go over about 2 pounds. It's usually between 1 and 1.5 pounds of meat. So that's just listening to my personal hunger and satiety. And I think because I prioritize eating a lot of organ meats that I get more satiety from that because, the body is getting its essential micronutrient needs met. And so I don't feel like I need to eat as much, and I get full really fast. After every meal, I feel Thanksgiving full. I feel completely stuffed and satisfied, and I'm never hungry outside of that. I never want snacks outside of that. And I'm just really happy doing that. I love every single meal that I have, and I love eating nose to tail and incorporating as many organ meats and also adding in caviar and salmon roe at times and just playing around and having fun with it because, traditionally hunters would eat the organ meats and give the muscle meats to the dogs. And, I don't know why we do the opposite of that today, but discovering or rediscovering organ meats has been so much fun. And the food is absolutely delicious. Like, I don't know why we have these perceptions around them as them being, unappetizing, because the nose to tail, the organ meat stuff that I eat is the most delicious. And I think that's just a response from being really tuned into my body. My body just loves getting all these nutrients.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like you figured out a really ideal approach, getting in a lot of micronutrients, and I love the nose to tail as well. It's been interesting for me too, because I was initially in the camp of, I don't like organ meats. I don't need them. Carnivore, muscle meat all the way. But my tastes have changed and I actually really like them. I feel the same way you do now that, when I'm eating liver, I feel great and it actually has started to taste good to me for the first time. It's taken a really long time. I've been carnivore for almost 3 years. And I wouldn't want to stop someone from trying this type of diet if they were averse to organ meats. But I think long term, it is best to include those types of foods. And it's really, just like you say, just sort of this societal paradigm that people find them gross. And I think once people start to incorporate them more in their diet and get a little creative about how they cook them, I think your recipe for pate is a great one. People will really come to enjoy them.
Thank you. And I think that it's just really important to note that the liver in chicken and in turkey is just a much, much milder flavor. If someone like me, my dad used to make liver when my mom would go away on business trips, and I'm still traumatized by how disgusting I thought it was. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was eating a lot of candy and a lot of junk food and a lot of highly processed, hyper palatable foods. And so liver tasted gross to me because it was so foreign. And when you get off of all that kind of food, you can really taste the nutrition and things. But if someone is like me, not super interested in revisiting those childhood memories of liver, chicken liver and turkey liver is really, really mild. And especially when you blend it in a way, I add like a little bit of garlic to it. I add some spices and play around with the flavors. Salt and pepper too helps. And just the texture of it being refrigerated and adding bone broth, it's so much more mild than sometimes the really stronger taste of beef or, calf liver. So that can be kind of a way or a place for people to start, or even just go to your, local health food store and get some pate and get some, pre-made pate that doesn't have sugar added into it if you don't want to make your own. And it's so delicious, and you can put it on crackers, or I just like to eat it as it is. Some people can do pork rinds with it if you're really used to having it, with a cracker or something. I like to just eat it like ice cream. It's so, so good.
Yeah, absolutely delicious. I feel the same way about nice, nutrient-rich, fatty foods. It really does start to taste like ice cream, and it's weird the way your tastes change. And you've talked a lot about collagen, things like bone broth, and also just supplementing collagen powder. Can you talk about why you do that? Does that have to do with glycine and methionine ratios? What are some of the benefits of collagen, and why do you incorporate that in your diet?
So the main thing for me is repairing my gut lining, because I had major autoimmune reactions and flares from having leaky gut for years. So I had major reactions to gluten, and I was doubled over in pain a couple times a week. It's just searing pain in my abdomen from having leaky gut and these autoimmune flares. And so for me, repairing the gut lining has been a huge priority for me, especially it has a huge connection to mood as well. And collagen and gelatin is one of the best ways to repair the gut. It also strengthens your hair, skin, and nails. So I've recently had to stop going for manicures because my nails were growing so fast that I had to go like every week and a half.
Wow.
And I just started doing it myself at home because it was just getting too crazy to have to go all the time. I don't really like going and getting that stuff done. My hair has had a huge impact from that. I've always had very fine hair. And I went to a new hairstylist when I was in Denver last, and she was doing my highlights, and she's like, wow, you're so lucky you have such thick hair. I was like, are you making fun of me? Like, what? And she's saying my root regrowth was so thick, and I've noticed it in my skin. I've noticed it in, just these sort of added benefits of having really strong nails and strong hair. And, my main reason for doing it was really repairing the gut, but it has so many other benefits. And it also supports liver function. It helps with joint pain, cardiovascular health, and bone growth, which is a huge priority for me as I grow in life. I just want to strengthen my bones. And I just think there's so many benefits to it. And I love adding it to my coffee. I still drink coffee and enjoy it. And I haven't cut it out to this point. I tried cutting it out for a month and I didn't notice any difference. So for now, I've kept it, and I love adding it to my coffee. And it's just really easy. If you just get gelatin or collagen and add it in, instead of having to make bone broth, if you're busy, if you enjoy making it and you have the time for it, great. But if you don't, then it's a really easy way of boosting your health. And I think that so much of the benefits and the results that people see from doing carnivore comes from having a repaired gut. And we still don't know a lot about the gut lining, but, just having that repaired gut and a strong gut, it has so many benefits to it. And I just adding 1 scoop of collagen, per day to your food, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, I really like that suggestion. And I started to incorporate more collagen in my diet as well for a lot of the same reasons. I came into the carnivore diet because of a lot of gut issues. And I also reading more and more, it seems like there aren't really downsides to including collagen too. There've been studies where they over supplement people with glycine and find really no ill effects up to very high doses. And I know you've had some recent interesting podcasts about fasting, including one with Seamland, who's great, super knowledgeable guy. What are your opinions of fasting? Obviously, I'm sure it depends a lot on the context of what someone's looking for and their goals, but how do you think about fasting in general and tips for how the average person can incorporate fasting to some degree?
It's ironic because I've been doing a lot of podcasts about fasting lately, but my main intention with it is to share how overdoing fasting can be a negative, because we all know there's lots of great benefits to fasting, but there's a couple points that I'm trying to drive home. The first is you don't need to do a ton of fasting. If you just have a daily eating window and you eat really well at your meals and you really nourish your body at your meals, and you then fast between your meals, you spend so much time in the post-absorptive state every week that you can be fasting over 140 hours a week just by eating, even with a couple meals a day. And I just don't think that it's necessary for most people to engage in a ton of fasting. I do think autophagy has a lot of great benefits for longevity, but one of the things I love the most about keto and this whole lifestyle is that it mimics fasting in the body, and it activates so many of the same pathways that fasting actually activates without having to fast. It's really, really amazing in that way. And we see that it has very similar interactions in the body, from lowered mTOR activation and lower ratio of IGF to insulin-like growth factor. And we see a lot of the same things that happen with our fatty acid mobilization and AMPK. It's amazing that it can do this without having to fast. It's one of the things I've always talked about, is how amazing keto can be to derive all of these results without actually having to forego food. You can still nourish your body super well at your meals, and you don't have to skip meals, especially if it's something that's difficult for you. In my opinion, fasting should come organically and naturally because you're so well nourished. And there can be some negative sides, some downsides to doing too much fasting, too much autophagy. I do think autophagy is an incredible process. I myself do a seasonal fast. I like to do 5 to 6, sometimes 7 days seasonal fast for autophagy because our cells have these little recycling plants in them where they take misfolded proteins and damaged organelles, and they take all that cellular debris, they take it down to this recycling center, they break it down back into its components, into its degraded amino acids, and rebuild new proteins from that. And it's incredible that we can support that process. But I just think that, even doing 1 3-day fast every quarter or once a year, anything that you do, if you incorporate that, is great, but you don't need to do that. You can just have a daily eating window, and you can just eat 2-3 times a day or once a day if you prefer that. And you're still going to get so many benefits because when you practice, especially a zero carb carnivore approach, but also just very, very low carb, you're keeping your stores of glycogen much lower. And so you actually get back into the fasted state much quicker after a meal than if you are on a standard American diet. And you just spend a lot of time in the fasted post-absorptive state where glucagon is dominant hormone, and we're able to, metabolize fatty acids for our, as our main fuel source. And so there's a couple points that I want people to know, that they don't have to push themselves to do all this fasting, when maybe just following a ketogenic diet or following very low carb or carnivore is already doing so much, especially if you're emphasizing nutrient density. You're getting so many benefits out of that.
I love that point, Vanessa. And I think it was a couple years ago that Ted Naiman had a tweet and an infographic on Twitter showing how a zero carb diet or a ketogenic diet mimics a lot of the benefits of fasting, and how in terms of certain health parameters, it's almost indistinguishable between someone that's purely fasting and eating zero carbs, and how Amber O'Hearn has talked about it as well, how humans are uniquely able to experience a lot of the benefits of ketosis and fasting without actually restricting calories chronically or not eating any food at all. And we should take advantage of that and not just keep stacking stressors on top of each other with, 24-hour fasts and 6 cardio sessions a week with lifting weights and, kickboxing and jujitsu and all these things. I think it's a great idea to focus on nourishment and finding a way to get a lot of those benefits without overly restricting yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, that's such a good point.
And Vanessa, I feel like I could talk to you all day. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and really appreciate you coming on the show. But this has been excellent. I think people are going to love to hear a little bit more of the science, and also just your experience with helping hundreds of people work through these issues, while studying them in an academic setting. Where can folks find out more about you, find your programs, find your podcast? I'll link to it all in the show notes as well on carnivorecast.com.
Absolutely. So my podcast is Fast Keto, and you can follow me. My most active feeds are definitely on Instagram at Ketogenic Girl. On Facebook, the page is The Ketogenic Girl, and on Twitter also Ketogenic Girl. And I do quite a bit of content on trying to make the science of keto as easy to approach as possible. My book is called Keto Essentials on Amazon, and it is a book breaking down some of the science behind keto, and also has over 150 keto recipes. So those are some of the main works that I've done. And also my program is a Ketogenic Girl Challenge, and it has meal plans. It has my support and coaching. And I just love having the privilege of getting to support people and coach people and help people find, results that they've been looking for and wanting for themselves, so they can go and really maximize and make the most out of life and live all their dreams.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, Vanessa. Have a great time at KetoCon, and I'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you, Scott. It's really been an honor to be here, and thank you to your listeners for bringing out this great conversation in us.
Yep.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.